Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Has raged.
Hey guys, it has been a long time since I've checked up on any news about the war in Ukraine. So, good video as any. Great channel, The Military Show. Let's learn. How's everyone doing? I can't hear you, but I hope you're doing well. My name's Connor. If you're new, original link top of the description. Let's learn what's going on.
The war in Ukraine has raged for over 2 years, and in that time, Ukraine has achieved significant victories against a formidable adversary. Despite a challenging start to 2024, marked by relentless missile and drone attacks from Russia, Ukraine's resolve has remained unshaken. Instead of collapsing as some experts predicted, Russia ramped up its aggression with the hope of breaking Ukraine's spirit through sheer force and brutality. But Ukraine has not only withstood these attacks, it's turned the tide, demonstrating remarkable resilience and strategic prowess. How has Ukraine managed to defy the odds and start winning again? And more importantly, can this momentum continue until Ukraine secures a definitive victory?
I love hearing comments from you guys in any video, but when it comes to something like this, I would love to hear opinions on what you guys think, and not what you would like to happen. Okay, if you want to say what you would like to happen, sure. But how would you say, if you had to bet, just how you see this war ending? Do you see Russia keeping any territory gained? Do you see Russia completely push out and Putin being tried in some court? Do you see just going on for years and years and years? I'm just curious what people, mainly Europeans, think of just how this is going to end.
We've got the answers in this video, so stay tuned. Firstly, it's important to understand that Ukraine's actions aren't solely responsible for the country's victories on the battleground. Sure, Ukraine is fighting back as fiercely as ever, not letting Russia gain any permanent foothold, due in large part to the military aid from the US flowing again into Ukraine, which has begun to turn the tide in the war. But believe it or not, there's another major factor that can be partially credited for Ukraine's success: Russia. That's right, the very country Ukraine is fighting against has inadvertently contributed to its setbacks. With this in mind, let's see how each of these factors has played out on the battlefield and what they mean for the future of the conflict. Ukraine's resilience and strategic brilliance have been crucial to its success so far. These were the driving forces behind the highly successful 2022 Ukrainian counteroffensive that the country hopes to replicate in 2024. With that in mind, let's briefly revisit the key moments from 2023 to understand where Ukraine is in its current counteroffensive. On June 11th, the Ukrainian 68th Jaeger Brigade, supported by a few territorial defense battalions, managed to recapture the village of Blahodatny, making it the third settlement to be liberated by Ukrainian forces during the counteroffensive. Around the same time, Ukrainian forces also recaptured Storoziva and Novodorivka in eastern Zaporizhia and western Donetsk, successfully breaching Russia's first line of defense in the region. On June 17th, Ukraine launched a massive attack on the Crimea Bridge, marking the second time this vital structure was hit. This time, marine-based drones used in the attack managed to destroy a portion of the bridge, killing...
Guys, I don't know how accurate this is, but this looks like a whole lot of just flat farmland. Is that the majority of eastern Ukraine territory? Is just completely flat farm fields?
Successfully breaching Russia's first line of defense in the region. On June 17th, Ukraine launched a massive attack on the Crimea Bridge, marking the second time this vital structure was hit. This time, marine-based drones used in the attack managed to destroy a portion of the bridge, killing 2 people. The attack in question was important for 2 reasons. One, disabling or even disrupting the bridge that connects the occupied Crimean Peninsula to mainland Russia and allows the movement of military supplies and reinforcements, is a significant strategic blow to Russia. And 2, this attack once again proved that Ukraine is more than capable of penetrating Russia's defenses, and that none of the Russian facilities, no matter how important, are truly untouchable. On August 24th, Ukraine revisited Crimea, this time sending in an elite squad to raid the peninsula's western coast. This was
that sort of psychological effect has to be huge. Just letting know your opponent that they can't be safe in certain areas and therefore just deploy all of their troops to others. If you just give them a little hint of like, or proof like I can hit you here, then they have to draw some resources that could have been for an attack elsewhere back to the place that was hit, even if you never hit it again.
Also, this time sending in an elite squad to raid the peninsula's western coast. This was also Ukraine's first official incursion into the Crimean Peninsula since Russia illegally annexed it in 2014. Symbolically, the raid took place on Ukraine's Independence Day. The unit landed near the village of Olenivka, killed 30 Russian soldiers, raised a Ukrainian flag, and safely returned home. This incursion alone displayed Ukrainian defiance and courage in all its glory, once again showing why the country received such widespread support in its fight against its oppressor. Courage was on display once again on August 28th, when Ukrainian forces penetrated the first line of Russia's southern defenses in the Zaporizhia region, despite this line being heavily mined. This breach was made possible by long-range field artillery provided by NATO allies, which have an average range of between 18.6 and 24.9 miles, according to a Ukrainian Brigadier General, Sergei Baranov. He explained that these weapons made it possible to destroy or damage the enemy's guns, as well as to move the enemy's artillery from the front line into the depths and prevent counter-battery warfare against Ukraine's artillery. On March 12th, Ukraine carried out the most sweeping unmanned aerial attack inside Russia since the invasion began. The attack spanned 9 Russian regions, primarily targeting energy facilities, including the country's fourth largest refinery, Lukoil Norsy, some 500 miles away from the Ukrainian border. Proving that it can prevail on all fronts, Ukraine also launched an important attack on 2 warships in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol on March 24, 2024. The warships in question were amphibious landing ships, the Yamal and the Azov. In addition to these ships, this huge overnight attack also...
Does anyone know what the opinions on the war right now of like surrounding it, like Moldova, Romania, like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, like what their feelings are with all of this happening? Well, Turkey's in NATO, and they're in the south here. But I just wonder, like, what does Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, Armenia think about this? Azerbaijan and Armenia seem to be having their own difficulties they're dealing with, so maybe they have other stuff to worry about.
The March 24th, 2024. The warships in question were amphibious landing ships, the Yamal and the Azov. In addition to these ships, this huge overnight attack also damaged a communication center and several other facilities belonging to the Black Sea Fleet. Celebrating the attack, the commander of the Ukrainian Air Force, Mykola Oleshuk, wrote on social media, "The sky and the sea are of the same color. I thank the pilots and Navy for their successful combat work. Crimea is ours. To the victory together." Ukraine has seemingly retained the same unyielding spirit in 2024, though the nature of the conflict has drastically changed. This time, Ukraine is mostly on the defensive, as Russia is the one launching a major summer offensive. However, one thing remains the same. Ukraine is still scoring one victory after another, and more importantly, preventing Russia from doing the same. As for Ukraine's major current wins, they mostly use the same modus operandi. For instance, on June 30th, at least 7 Ukrainian drones hit the Novolipetsk metallurgical plant in Lipetsk Oblast, damaging an oxygen separation unit and causing a fire. This was the 5th strike against the...
So cool how it's so simply just slingshotted.
Damaging an oxygen separation unit and causing a fire. This was the 5th strike against the same plant in 2024 alone, demonstrating Ukraine's persistence in targeting critical infrastructure. What makes the Novolipetsk metallurgical plant a critical target is the fact that it's the largest producer of steel and high-value added steel products in Russia. Ukrainian drones have also continued to strike Russian oil refineries, radar stations, and other critical military targets. The latest attacks focused on Krasnodar, a city across the Kerch Strait from Crimea, and Yeysk, a town housing a military airfield. As for the offensive operations, Ukraine has shelled parts of Russia's Kursk region, as well as intensifying attacks on the Belgorod region. This area borders Ukraine's Kharkiv region and has been under near constant attacks since the beginning of the invasion.
Guys, I wonder if the increased technology in simple like drone warfare and like, is this going to just make tanks not worth it in the future? Just knowing you have to spend so much money to create a tank that can be taken out by a cheap drone with an artillery shell or something under it just dropping, right? And if you shoot that down, so what? It was like, what, like $10,000 or something like that compared to... So is there going to be a point where militaries can just manufacture such small... tank-killing drones and weaponry to the point that like just tanks won't be effective anymore, or are tanks always going to have some importance? Like if it comes to like leading an infantry attack or something.
Ukraine's Kharkiv region and has been under near constant attacks since the beginning of the invasion. Ukraine also targeted this region in the summer of 2023, which Russia spent months preparing fortifying the 600-mile-long front there. The region has been persistently attacked due to Belgorod's status as a major logistics hub for Russian military activity. However, Ukraine's arguably most decisive victories are taking place in the bordering region we mentioned, the Kharkiv Oblast. So far, Russia's grand Kharkiv push has failed to materialize, partially due to Ukraine's fierce defense and partially due to Russia's incompetence. As a part of the much-discussed summer offensive, Russia started intensifying attacks on the Kharkiv Oblast in May 2024, officially opening a new northern front. On May 23rd alone, at least 15 Russian S-300 long-range missiles hit the cities of Kharkiv, Lubotin, and Zolochiv, killing at least 7 people and destroying civilian infrastructure. Russian soldiers have also swarmed Kharkiv, with some 2,000 troops being part of the front line in the initial ground attack, according to Ukrainian military commentators Konstantin Mashevets and Alexander Kovalenko. Reportedly, another 2,000 soldiers were in immediate reserve, while 4,000 were making their way toward Kharkiv. Thanks to the sheer numbers and an element of surprise, Russian armed forces managed to claim 9 villages in the first 2 days, following the initial May attacks in the region. But why this region? According to Russia, the Kharkiv Oblast was targeted in an effort to protect the Russian settlements in the Belgorod region that kept getting attacked by the Ukrainian side. By seizing Kharkiv, Russia could establish a buffer zone, preventing Ukraine from scoring more victories in the region. However, if you know anything about Russia and its president Vladimir Putin, is that there's almost always a hidden agenda behind their military actions. This time, the plan was to open up a new front in the north and draw Ukrainian reserves to defend it, allowing Russia to focus on its true target, the Donetsk Oblast. As Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky puts it, the attacks on the Kharkiv Oblast aim to stretch the Ukrainian forces and undermine the morale and motivational basis of Ukraine's ability to defend themselves. Now, to be fair, this is a pretty standard military tactic, often referred to as a feint attack, and it's usually successful at diverting enemy forces and resources away from the primary target. But not this time. Russia has failed to mount a full-scale attack on the Kharkiv Oblast, which would require Ukraine to commit significant resources to defend the region. Russia has hardly taken any ground in real terms, as retired senior British Army officer Rupert Jones puts it. As a result, Ukraine has managed to stabilize the region by June 2024.
Sorry, what did he say?
The primary target blast, which would require Ukraine to commit significant resources to defend the region. Russia has hardly taken any ground in real terms, as retired senior British Army officer Rupert Jones puts it. As a result, Ukraine has managed to stabilize the region by June 2024, gradually pushing the Russian forces back, thus scoring a major win in the ongoing conflict. But why has Russia's Kharkiv offensive failed so miserably? There are a few factors explaining this phenomenon, some external, but most of them internal. Simply put, the Russian armed forces are in total disarray from leadership to frontline soldiers. Leadership within the Russian military has been compromised by frequent changes and questionable decision-making. The lack of stable and effective command has undoubtedly hindered the cohesive strategy execution and operational effectiveness of the Russian military in Kharkiv and beyond. As for the frontline soldiers, they simply aren't trained enough. This deficiency has left them ill-prepared to handle the complexities of urban warfare and sustained military operations, leading them to an almost certain death. Plus, it doesn't help that...
Guys, is this an AK-47 that just has a, what do you call this, a stand to make it more accurate, or is this a completely different gun? I have to ask these questions because then my mind can't focus on the words being said in the video, so sorry if it gets a bit much.
Kharkiv and beyond. As for the frontline soldiers, they simply aren't trained enough. This deficiency has left them ill-prepared to handle the complexities of urban warfare and sustained military operations, leading them to an almost certain death. Plus, it doesn't help that Russia seems to be fond of the so-called meat grinder strategy, which involves sending waves of poorly trained and ill-equipped soldiers into combat with little regard for their survival.
Classic Russia.
So it's no wonder low morale is another major reason why Russian forces have been unsuccessful in Kharkiv. To put it plainly, their heart isn't in the fight, and how could it be? With the casualties mounting, the motivation to fight being questioned, and the reality of prolonged engagement settling in, the Russian resolve seems to crumble like sandcastles in the rain. Of course, this is a major problem.
I don't see like if anything I learned about Russia in history, pick it, okay? Great Northern War, Napoleonic Wars, not World War One, because you know World War Two, is that they have Russia seems to have a strategy of like you don't have an elected government of just boom, but like I will never like I'll believe Russia will quit when like they say like we quit or whatever, and I wonder at what's it called when sometimes it's better to be in a worse situation than a slightly less worse situation because the worst situation will make you do something that the slightly less worse situation you might not take any action yet, right? And so if Russia was succeeding rapidly at some point and pushing, and it looks like the Ukrainian army is collapsing in many ways, and it looks like Russia's going to capture Kyiv, at that point, do you send soldiers in? I'm wondering if there's any point. I know Ukraine is not in NATO. It's not bound by is it Article 2 or something where if you attack on one is an attack on everyone. But I wonder if there's a threshold if the collapse and takeover Ukraine is inevitable in what looks like months or something, that NATO troops would actually be sent in. I wonder what any of you think about that, or if that would happen
for the country, as Putin's plan.
And if not that, I'm sure weapons and everything would rapidly increase and stuff.
Sandcastles in the rain. Of course, this is a major problem for the country, as Putin's plan for victory entails making gradual advances through consistent offensive operations. On paper, this sounds like a great idea for Russia, as the country should be able to hold any territory it takes. However, the reality on the ground tells a different story. The reality is that Ukraine is fighting back and holding its ground with fierce determination, thwarting Russian advances at every turn. Determination alone wouldn't be enough to achieve such amazing results. This leads us to the final factor aiding Ukraine's victories against Russia, the Western military aid. In fact, the lack of this aid is what allowed Russia to score major victories in early 2024. The $61 billion military aid package was held back in US Congress due to some strong Republican opposition. Without this aid, Ukraine's military grew weaker with every passing day, which Russia used as an opportunity to launch its relentless assaults during the first 4 months of the year. This dire situation started to...
In my opinion, asking like for loans, like I'll loan you it or something like that, or saying that this is like a gift or like us being nice is, if, in my opinion, as much material and money that we can give to Ukraine to help them stave off Russia, the better. Not because it's nice or like it's what you should do, but because of our own interests. If Russia takes over Ukraine, then that'll set a precedent that, hey, this worked, maybe I'll look elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying they'll go directly for NATO. If there's any countries that I would be so glad to be in NATO if I was them, it's the Baltic. It's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Poland, I think, is just too strong. Finland, I just think is too strong. And, they're in NATO. And so, in that effect, that they're strong as well. But I don't want to see this and then show, Xi Jinping in China, oh, look, it worked, and then do this. And so it's not a gift. It's literally in our interest to help Ukraine. And so I don't like the pausing of aid. I think it's very naive to think that, like, what are we doing? We have our own problems. Why are we giving some random country a bunch of money? It's like, because it's good for us. Like it's good. And for people not to look that far and just be like, wait, money to someone who's not us? What's going on? I think it's just so stupid. And anyways, I don't see this as a gift. I just see it as like a please take this and win. You don't let Russia do this.
Change on April 20th.
For us, not just for you, but for us as well.
24th, the day President Joe Biden finally signed into law a war aid measure worth $95 billion, with $61 billion allocated to Ukraine. $1 billion worth of military assistance was immediately sent to the country in an effort to alleviate the pressure on Ukraine and bolster its defenses against the ongoing Russian onslaught. Now, you might ask the simple question, why only $1 billion? If the lack of military aid has caused such devastating consequences for Ukraine, why not send more aid sooner? That's a good question and a logical one.
Well,
however, this question also has a logical answer. It simply isn't feasible to deliver huge amounts of military aid instantly due to logistical, political, and strategic considerations. Tons of military hardware is, as you might expect, incredibly difficult to transport from a purely logistical standpoint.
This is the difference. This is the thing that is, if you want to call it a benefit of having friends in the world like China, Iran, and North Korea, who are more like there's no elections to worry about. It's like, yeah, I can give you this. You don't have to jump through bureaucratic loops or government naysayers or whatever. It's just like Ukraine has allies that are democracies and have to, and like, it's like, hey, can I have $10 billion? China's like, yeah, okay, sure, here you go. Like, fine. I'll take this in the future, though. You owe me. And the U.S. is like, I got to go ask my people first. I'm not saying that democracies are worse than dictatorships, one-party states. I'm just saying that, you know, Ukraine has very powerful people helping it, but they can't just do it without going to their government first, and that's a big hurdle.
Plus, it's not as if the US military has billions of dollars worth of military equipment lying around in a single warehouse.
I mean, yeah, we left it in Afghanistan,
waiting to be sent to its destination. On the one hand, this is a direct result of the post-Cold War peace dividend, which saw significant reductions in military equipment manufacturing, stockpiles, and infrastructure. On the other, it's simply not practical to hold huge stockpiles of weapons for an indefinite period. Some munitions also have a shelf life, so stocking up on them isn't always feasible or cost-effective. If they aren't used by a certain time, they're used for training to prevent them from going bad. Of course,
that's the scary thing about, you know how like arming yourself for a defensive purpose. It's kind of scares. Well, no, not scares. But is that even if you're doing it to prevent war, you're going to get to a reason. It's like you have all of these weapons. Well, you might as well use them for something, and then that could lead to a dangerous war.
What is the issue of the supporting bureaucracy?
That didn't really make sense. Forget that.
Used for training to prevent them from going bad.
I tried to make sense.
Of course, there's always the issue of the supporting bureaucracy, which further complicates the rapid deployment of military aid. It simply takes a lot of time to navigate bureaucratic processes, ensuring that this aid is delivered efficiently and effectively to where it's needed most. So with all these challenges in mind, what's the current state of the US military aid flow to Ukraine? Well, according to Lieutenant General Kirilo Budanov, the chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, the truly transformative amount of aid is expected to arrive in Ukraine in mid to late July 2024. Ukraine expects some $150 million worth of weapons and ammunition to arrive, a package that includes the potent Hawk interceptor missiles, which have replaced Ukraine's shoulder-launched Stinger air defense missile systems. The Hawk missiles have an operational range between 28 and 31 miles, can reach an altitude of up to 65,000 feet, and can fly.
How much, you know, the Iron Dome system that Israel has that's super good at shooting stuff down? Now, I know Ukraine is many, many more times larger than Israel, and so you need a lot more Iron Dome missile denial systems. But couldn't you, like, how much do those cost? I'd imagine a lot, but maybe, like, set some around Kyiv or something like that?
Fly at the maximum speed of Mach 2.4. The Hawk missiles were also part of the $225 million worth aid package delivered in early June, together with HIMARS ammunition and 155mm howitzers. The military aid that has already arrived in Ukraine has allowed the country to reduce the previously substantial artillery advantage Russia had at the start of 2024. Prior to April, Russia held a 7-to-1 artillery advantage over Ukraine. Even if you know nothing about military strategy, you know that such a disparity uncertainty can only spell trouble for Ukraine. However, with the new influx of Western aid, Ukraine has managed to narrow the gap significantly, cutting it to a 5-to-1 ratio. The more military aid flows in, the more this gap will narrow. However, it's important to note that the delivery of new aid wasn't the only way the West helped Ukraine score victories against Russia.
Intelligence?
An equally important move was finally allowing Ukraine to use the existing Western-supplied weapons to strike targets inside Russia. Before May 2024, Ukraine was only allowed to use these weapons to defend itself on its own soil. These restrictions heavily limited Ukraine's ability to effectively counter Russian aggression beyond its borders. Luckily, the Western nations, led by the US, UK, France, and Germany, realized the fallacy of this policy in May after Russia launched its Kharkiv offensive. As a result, they allowed Ukraine to use the weapons they'd sent to strike Russian targets.
I get the logic behind it. You don't want to start, a giant nuclear conflict, and you don't want to start USA Russia or NATO Russia combat head to head, right? That'll go from a regional conflict to a world war. It could do that pretty quickly. But I mean, not having that, not allowing them, you're allowing Russia to have the giant advantage of, like, as long as we stay in our Russian territory, not counting like Crimea and the parts we took over already, then you just have an immunity shield to keep all of your weaponry and material and manpower completely safe, and then head in, right? So that's a giant disadvantage.
Around
Ukraine not being able
blast.
to do that.
This decisive move allowed Ukraine to thwart Russian attacks before they were even launched by striking military infrastructure and military airfields. However, the Western nations haven't lifted all the restrictions regarding the use of their weapons on Russian soil. Ukraine is still limited to only striking targets near the Kharkiv region and only for defensive purposes. For Ukraine to turn the current series of victories into a full-scale counter-offensive like the one in 2020,
only for defensive purposes. But isn't attacking Russian... What? How does that make sense? Okay, but attacking the things in Russia so they can attack is the defensive purpose. How can you... How...
3. The country will have to be allowed to expand its use of Western-supplied weapons across broader fronts and be allowed to use them for offensive operations against Russian forces not directly involved in preparing an attack against Ukraine. Being allowed to strike, for example, a major military...
That makes no sense to me. All Russian forces are preparing to attack Ukraine. So you have to wait until they're, like, in line?
headquarters preparing an attack against Ukraine. Being allowed to strike, for example, a major military headquarters deep into Russia, which is working on long-term tactics, would make all the difference for Ukraine and its war effort. Again, similarly to the military aid dilemma, you might wonder, why not just lift these restrictions altogether and let Ukraine unleash a full-scale counter-offensive using all available resources? This time the answer is mostly political. The West is simply afraid of provoking Russia and causing an all-out war in Europe. That's why the restrictions on the use of Western-supplied weapons were imposed in the first place. It seems that the Western nations are constantly trying to gauge Putin's so-called red lines and avoid making any moves that would cross them and escalate the conflict further. However, in almost...
Anyone who says, oh, screw that, like, strike Moscow if you want, scares me a bit, okay? I know a lot of that can be frustrating, but it does have some logic behind it. It's not just all being so cowardly and like appeasement, or not appeasement, just like, I wouldn't want U.S. weapons to say hit Moscow, all right? Because then, so there is a line I wouldn't
Putin
want.
has proven that he's all talk and no action on multiple occasions. This has given the West confidence in adjusting their policies cautiously, balancing support for Ukraine with the need to avoid a broader conflict. In addition to lifting limitations on the use of existing military equipment, Ukraine feels the West can support a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive by keeping the flow of aid coming. Among some Ukrainians, there is a looming fear that the political support for Ukraine in the West is waning as attention is being focused on the conflict in the Middle East. That concern is why Zelensky is pressing for Ukraine to be well-stocked to avoid a repeat of the 2024 delay that cost the country dearly. Among the most desired military aid, air defense systems are always high atop Zelensky's weapons wish list. In his own words, the sooner the world helps us deal with the Russian...
Sorry, I know Israel is a Western ally, is a U.S. ally, but they're not... Ukraine is in such a more dire situation. If all-out war happens in the Middle East and Iran goes straight against Israel, then okay, maybe. But the fact that Israel is and the Palestine conflict is taking up so much more attention than the Ukraine one is just a problem.
Combat aircraft launching these bombs, the sooner we can...
Make sure, guys, if you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I said something stupid, I would love nothing more than for you to call me out in the comments, answer any of my questions, any comments at all. Remember that, guys.
Justifiably strike the always high atop Zelensky's weapons wish list. In his own words, the sooner the world helps us deal with the Russian combat aircraft launching these bombs, the sooner we can strike, justifiably strike, at Russian military infrastructure, military airfields, the closer we will be to peace. Ukraine also needs these systems to deal with Russian reconnaissance drones, which report in real time, allowing the country to launch sudden, devastating airstrikes. If Ukraine manages to get all these in order, spring of 2025 is a totally realistic timeframe for a counteroffensive. A more pressing timeframe isn't necessary for now, as Ukraine isn't really under huge operational pressure from Russia in 2024, thanks to its fierce resistance. So let's say Ukraine does launch a massive counteroffensive in 2025, following a successful 2024 campaign. Will the country be able to go all the way, turn the tide completely, and secure a lasting victory against Russia? It's possible, however, numerous pieces of the puzzle must fall into place for this to happen. Chiefly, the Ukrainian forces will need consistent and substantial military aid from the West, not only in terms of weapons, but also logistical support, training, and intelligence. Ukraine must do all in its power to be in a better position than Russia when the time comes to resolve the conflict once and for all. As Rupert Jones puts it, he who dominates events on the ground, take the spoils. Of course, by this point, no one is foolish enough to think Russia will simply roll over and concede. Even now that Ukraine is winning once again, Russia isn't showing any signs of stopping. The country seems to be preparing for a long-term war, as signaled by a major change in Russia's military leadership. Specifically, Sergei Shoigu, an experienced military officer, was replaced as Russia's Minister of Defense by Andrei Belyusov, an economist. This shocking move sent a clear message: Russia's economy will now be fully mobilized for war. Russia's attacks still keep on coming despite its failed attempt to seize Kharkiv. On a peaceful Saturday, June 29th, Russian forces fired missiles at the town center in Vilnyansk, close to the southeastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, in a vicious midday attack that killed 7 people and injured 31 others. The death toll also included 2 children. There were no military targets there, simply townspeople enjoying a weekend day off from work, as confirmed by Ivan Fedorov, Zaporizhia's regional governor. Later, as this very video is being prepared, Russia hit an airfield in the Poltava region, located between Kyiv and Kharkiv, with Iskander missiles on July 2nd. So it's clear that Russia is still sticking to the by all means necessary approach to war in Ukraine. Because they had suffered from one counteroffensive in 2023, Russia undoubtedly learned from the experience. Since that counteroffensive, they have established a multi-layered defense system consisting of the following. Number 1, the construction of anti-tank ditches, designed to halt or slow down advancing armored vehicles, forcing them into a vulnerable position where they can be more easily targeted by Russian forces. Number 2, the installation of zigzag trenches, which prevent Ukrainian forces from firing down the entire length of Russian fortifications. Number 3, assembling Dragon's Teeth barricades, rows of large concrete pyramids that block or impede the movement of tanks and other vehicles. Number 4, planting minefields, which have already caused plenty of trouble for the Ukrainian forces. And number 5, positioning steel hedgehog obstacles, aka large spiked metal structures designed to block and damage vehicles, adding another layer of defense to thwart any advances. But even faced with these obstacles, Ukraine could still prevail, provided it receives all the support it needs. After all, Russia has proven incapable of defeating even a weakened Ukraine, let alone one bolstered by renewed Western aid and strategic support. Of course, this failure is a direct result of the resilient defenders Russia is up against, as well as its declining military with poor training, discipline, and morale. Russia's inability to seize opportunities that have virtually landed in its lap can also be explained by the incompetence of the Russian military leadership. It seems that
obviously you have to hand it to the soldiers first and foremost. Incredibly brave defending Ukraine. But what I think solidified like the biggest pivotal point in the Russia-Ukraine war was the initial reaction of the higher ups in the Ukrainian government. I think there were many like people who would have just fled. And if the command structure and the political structure at the top of Ukraine fled, and there was no, command structure, then I think Russia, it would have been a breeze, and it would have been way more chaos. So the initial job of like Zelensky, of staying put and just the resilient, like, nope, no one's leaving, we're fighting Russia. That was the difference, I think, between a quick Russian victory and a drawn out war like is happening right now. What was I going to say? I'll say at the end. I'll try to remember.
Most of its tactics boil down to bludgeoning its way forward with brute force, with little regard for the enormous attrition in the process. Ukraine, on the other hand, has shown remarkable adaptability and strategic finesse, consistently outmaneuvering Russian troops through innovative tactics. But will this be enough to take down the military mammoth that is Russia and the evil at its helm? What do you think? Can Ukraine continue its winning streak and ultimately prevail against Russia, despite the odds stacked against it?
The biggest drawback that Ukraine has, or one of, okay, in my opinion, is that the worst case scenario for Russia is that it gets pushed back to here, right? The worst case for Ukraine is its entire territory gets consumed. And I just think that is an enormous, to be honest, the only way that I see an end to this war where Ukraine receives all of its territory back, including Crimea, all of this territory, and the war is over, is if Putin somehow dies or is kicked out of office in some coup attempt or something like that. In my opinion, as long as Putin is healthy and is in power and is in control, I don't see how this ends in a complete Ukrainian victory. Me as someone who finds international relations, warfare, politics, worldwide politics, stuff like this, conflicts fascinating. I'm certainly no expert, so I like to give my opinions, but don't let me fool you if I am in showing I know a lot about what I'm talking about. I'm just giving my opinions here. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Chin up if you're not. You'll be good soon. Hopefully Ukraine prevails. I hope I'm not being too pessimistic, but aside from a Putin kicked out of power or death, I just don't see anytime soon a full regain of Ukrainian territory and an end to the war completely. Because again, like, Ukraine losing means there is no Ukraine anymore. Russia losing means it didn't gain the territory that it has in Ukraine. So the stakes just are so favorable to Russia in that. And as long as, again, Putin's in charge, I continue to be a little pessimistic about the outcome. Yeah. I'd love to see your guys' comments, especially on stuff like this. It's been a while since I caught up on Ukraine, Russia stuff. Military show, fantastic channel, great video. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye.